This episode of HaPi has been sponsored by the Soke. The Soke is a private mental health and wellness centre offering best-in-class psychotherapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, counsellors and leadership development specialists. The Soke cover common behavioural health issues such as depression, anxiety and other non-acute disorders, offering family therapy, child and adolescent counselling, offer outpatient treatment for eating disorders and addictions, as well as delivering a broad range of corporate wellbeing services. Please visit thesoke.uk for more information. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of HaPi. I'm delighted that you've joined us today, and I'm really pleased to welcome Maryam from the Soke. The Soke are going to be a sponsor partner for us in our next episode, which will be coming out in the next week or so. So Maryam, welcome. Would you like to give everyone an introduction to who you are and a little bit about the Soke for me, please?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I am the founder and the CEO of the Soke, as you mentioned, and it's SOKE rather than SOAK, which is a private mental health centre in London, seeing everything and anything and anyone from the age of, we have clients as young as 3, and we also have clients in their late 80s. We cover the full sort of range of mental health issues, personal development, coaching, sort of skill sets around the workplace, burnout, which is what we're going to talk about today. And of course, we have a lot of diagnostic and assessment work around children these days who are increasingly being asked to be assessed for ADHD and autism, and actually their parents are asking for it and the schools are asking for it and so on. Try and be a voice of reason in some of those cases, because everybody wants the assessment, but not a lot of people necessarily need it. So yeah, we cover the full spectrum of outpatient care and presentations in care. So we don't see people who are unwell enough who need to go into an inpatient setting. It's really about looking after the functioning unwell. And we do a lot of work around prevention. So we work with a lot of corporate clients around how to look after their people and how to instill sort of cultural changes little by little that will make for a healthier and more productive working environment.
Good, excellent. Thank you for that intro. And you're right. We're going to talk about. When you and I had a call before this to discuss what we'll be talking about, I think we both very agreed early on that a good subject title would be burnout, and it's a word that so many people use, and it kind of trips off the tongue in many ways. But as you said to me, quite rightly so, there is a far more detailed explanation about burnout, which we're going to cover, and you're the expert to talk about that for us today. So we've got a few questions that we're going to cover in the next 25, 30 minutes for people to learn a little bit more about burnout. So let's go through them. And the first one is, very straightforward, is what is and isn't burnout, which I think is a great way of phrasing that. So what is and isn't burnout?
People who are suffering with stress may mistake that for burnout these days. Stress is pretty much, we've all experienced stress at different times, and it's completely normal and to be expected for work to eat into our personal time occasionally, and that is the cause of stress. Stress really is when you are thinking about work when you should be recovering from work. So during your recovery time, which is evenings, weekends, whatever it is, as I say, it's fine for a limited period of time, but it's when it becomes chronic that it becomes something more serious. So how I would say the first point is to distinguish stress from burnout. Stress eats into your recovery time. It's a temporary thing.
Mm-hmm.
Change your circumstances around work, either your patterns of work or finishing a project, which, you know, takes a weight off your shoulders, all of those things, and being able to recover, that is stress.
Mm-hmm.
Burnout is something that almost exists whilst you're at work, because you're productive, you've got your head down, you're just getting, it's when you go home and you can't stop thinking about it. Burnout is actually present in the way that you do your work. So the various factors that sort of play into burnout there are actually, it's an official clinical term, by the way, burnout. It's recognized as having 3 key characteristics. The first is that you're persistently exhausted. So no amount of sleep, no amount of any kind of recovery is going to make any difference. You remain exhausted. The second characteristic is that you have a disassociation from your workplace and your colleagues, and that sort of is grounded in cynicism. So you kind of, you know, that don't really believe in what you're doing, don't really have a lot of emotional connection to your work or to your colleagues, and it all seems like a bit of a waste of time. The third thing is that you believe that no matter what you do, you are ineffective. So nothing that you're doing is actually, you know, getting you or the organization from A to B. You're like a cog in a wheel. You're just rolling over and over again. So those 3 things, if they are present, then you have the makings of burnout.
Okay.
So that's the sort of, in a nutshell, explanation for the difference between stress and burnout.
So would you say that the next question we're going to cover is how can you self-diagnose burnout? You kind of started touching on that just now. Do you want to maybe unpack that a little bit more for us?
Sure. Well, as I say, the first sort of key characteristics are those 3 things. And I think persistence in all 3 of them, but, you know, I mentioned it in relation to exhaustion, but persistence with all 3 of them is necessary. It has to be over a prolonged period of time. There is a sort of a checklist that you can go through, which I'm happy to go through. It's got 6 points, and if your listeners or viewers want to grab a piece of paper or put it in their phone, and score from 1 to 10 on the following 6 questions. And if things are good, go 10. If things are bad, go 1, and everything in between. So the positive number is the higher number. So number 1, how manageable is your workload? So if it's very manageable, you know, you go above 5 and so on. Number 2, values. How does your work align with your values? Do you actually believe in what you're doing? Do you feel an emotional connection to the ultimate goal, either of what you're doing or to the organization as a whole? Number 3 is reward. How appropriately compensated are you? Again, sort of, if you think you're well paid and remunerated, both actually financially and through recognition of contribution you make, then you score higher. Number 4 is control. How much autonomy do you have over the way that you do your work, and how you are expected to produce the results? You know, is there an element of, I suppose, respect there for what you're doing? Number 5 is fairness. How equitably you think you're being treated in relation to your colleagues. And last but not least is community. How strongly you feel that your workplace relationships are actually a positive factor in your today profession. So if you have scored highly, anything above 5 towards 10, then you are hopefully not at risk of burnout. You may have stress, you may have other things going on, but if you score sort of below 5 consistently on all of that, then you need to start sort of asking some questions. And the good thing about this checklist is that you may find that, for example, you score, 10 on community, but 2 on reward. What it does, what's helpful about this checklist is that you can identify the areas of weakness.
Okay.
So there is still a possibility for you to take measures yourself to rectify the parts that aren't strong.
Right.
And it's going through the exercise, number one, it sort of identifies where you are on a clinically recognized scale. But number two, it's a very good way of determining whether you're in the right role, doing the right thing, and feeling sort of fulfilled as you should be. So those are the sort of the top level, persistent exhaustion, cynicism towards what you're doing, and a belief of ineffectiveness. And then below that is the checklist of 6 sort of subcategories, and how you can determine whether or not you are at risk of burnout.
At risk of burnout. I think it's a really good way of doing that individually, and I hope people that are watching and or listening to this do take time, to look at that, because as you're right, there are times in our work lives and our personal lives where it is busy. You say, I'm stressed out, I'm just at the point of burnout. But then I suppose in a way you could think, well, am I really? So I think that's a really, really clever way of actually taking time and self-assessing. Right, am I there? Am I at that point?
Well, the good thing about this list and this methodology of determining where you are is that it is really work related. I mean, you could probably use it for other circumstances separately, but I think we see a lot of people who are stressed, who think they've got burnout, and actually a lot of what's going on is going on in their life outside work. So as a result, work becomes stressful as well. But the reality is they're bringing a lot of stuff from the outside, from their lives. We're not just employees, we're sort of people with many different facets and many different sort of systems, as we call it, in the mental health world. You've got lots of different systems going on: your family, your friends, your health, your sense of security. All of those things play into how you feel. So being able to narrow it down by saying, right, I'm going to ask these 6 questions specifically about my work. Then if there's still a niggling feeling, even though you've scored highly, then you can sort of say, okay, what am I going to look at outside my work that's causing me to feel the way I'm feeling?
Have you seen, so now that you're talking about that, in terms of getting that difference between, that separation between work and outside of work, obviously since COVID, the whole working from home thing has become a bigger thing. So then people can get the two muddled up sometimes because they are working from home. Have you seen more cases of what you would regard as burnout since that has become more of a norm for people because they can't separate work from home and it's all coming together?
Yeah, well, certainly in the early days we were seeing that. I think there's less of that spillover now that people in the main are at the office. It's certainly sector-wise it makes a difference. So the people that we see who are most burned out from this sort of lack of separation are people who work in technology. And that is because they seem to, first of all, they do have autonomy over their work. They're They're coding, they are sort of completely focused on what they're doing, and suddenly 10 hours has passed and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they're still doing it. The reason they're not burnt out is because they enjoy it so much.
Right, okay.
But, there is an absence of boundaries.
Yeah,
And I
okay.
think that is ultimately the key to everything. Being able to have boundaries, taking perhaps even, the most obvious sort of simplistic almost steps. I've got a colleague actually who does work from home. And when she is working from home, she wears her lanyard from the office with her, ID card, so that when she finishes, when she puts that on, she's like, I'm in work mode. And at the end of the day, the minute she takes that off, that's it. She's not at work anymore. And that very simple step allows her to create that before and after difference. So she now knows, and some people I know that we've worked with, they get, once upon a time, there was that sort of understanding that everybody was dressed sort of from the neck up during lockdown. I think more and more people now are actually properly dressing for work, even when they are working from home. And again, changing from your regular shirt into a t-shirt can be all the difference between putting it behind you. And I would recommend that people who do feel that there isn't that boundary between the two worlds because they're in the same setting that they were all day, they take little steps to be able to find the differences. It can be, again, somebody else I know, he sort of sits in his office and at the end of the day, he just opens his door, the dog comes running in, and suddenly everything's different. So you need to find what works for you and stick to it.
Yeah, I agree. And there can be examples you've given are, relatively small in terms of the lanyard experience, or not the lanyard example, and also just as you say, putting a proper shirt on as opposed to t-shirt and hoodie. And I think people now are getting that and understanding that, and that's where at home there can be a bit of a separation. Otherwise, it all becomes not muddled up as such, but you can begin to bring in the stresses of outside work into work, and then you're not as productive, and then obviously everything else can.
I think that although it's very convenient sometimes to work from home, one of the other things that psychologically helps is to not actually start doing two things. So for example, somebody might say, I'm working, but I also just put a load of laundry on, and then I'm going to, again, that's where you muddy the waters. I do know people who absolutely will not touch anything in their home, as if they were at work, as if they were physically not there. Again, so that they can have that separation of their two worlds.
I would like to say that I did that, but I think if I did that, then my wife would probably say, why is that washing not been put on? You've been at home all day today, etc. So, but everybody's different on that. But I do have to say, I do like to have, a bit of separation in some things as well. When I work from home, and knowing that door is closed, and it's head down and get on with work, and then as you say, maybe not quite the dog example that you gave, but when the door is open and my children are home, then I might still be working or about to finish up. But I think it's a really, really important lesson. Good. Yeah. Okay. We're kind of touched on this one a little bit as well. Is that kind of is there an automatic correlation between overwork and burnout? But would you say we've been kind of touching on that so far just now? And
yeah, I think overwork is. I don't know if there is an automatic correlation. I mean, the chances are if you've burnt out, then you have also overworked, but not counting the sort of the workload question out of those 6 on the checklist,
Mm-hmm.
really none of them require you to be overworking. They're much more about how you feel when you're working.
Mm-hmm.
I think the overworking thing can happen and be related to stress. It can be related to burnout, and it can just be neither of those things, but you somehow lose the quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of questions to be asked around overworking. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of them need to look again outside or beyond your workplace to find
Mm-hmm.
out why you're overworking. I've yet to come across anybody who says that I have my, my manager, my boss, whoever, standing over me saying work harder, work longer.
Mm-hmm.
There are very, very few, especially when you're talking to more senior people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The more junior people, I suppose that, they answer their answer to this question, why do you overwork, is because, well, I want to get far in my career and so on.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to the next level where you're not required to really prove anything, the question becomes, where is this pressure coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Pressure you to work like this. And most people, I think, recognize that they're putting pressure on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then you then dig a little bit. This is where therapy and coaching becomes quite helpful in trying to dig deeper and finding out why, where is. So a lot of people, particularly in certain fields where they've ended up where they've ended up because they've done very well academically,
Mm-hmm.
they've had markers to reach throughout academic career, and they've known, if I work this hard, this is what happens. I get grades and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Comes to the world of work, they're constantly in pursuit of this shifting target. Nobody's them a grade, but this is the way they've spent the first 20 years of their life effectively learning, and this is the only way they know. So it's sort of, that's where you kind of just, as I say, dig a little deeper and try to find out why you're doing this, what's going on outside your life. Some people it's to do with the personal pressure. Some people will say, I'm not happy at home, therefore work is a bit of an escape for me. There can be plenty of answers. There can be upsides to working the way that they work. And I think getting to the bottom of it is probably quite important to determine what's going on.
Yeah, I think like in any subject title like this, the more that you try and not hide away from it or ignore it, then obviously the worse it becomes. Like any illness, effectively, the more that you ignore it, whether that be what we're talking about today, or whether it be, something maybe a little bit more physical and obvious to you, the more you ignore it, then the worse it becomes. So I think the great opportunity that people have from organizations like yourself at the Soke is that they are experienced, qualified people who can work with you to try and recognize it and to put some kind of plan in place to help you along the way. So that's key for me. And I think that the final question that we're looking at is what steps. So people watching this today, and there'll be some people going, "That's me. That is exactly me," and they've maybe gone through the kind of checklist that we're looking at today. What steps do you or can somebody take if they recognise that they are burnt out?
It's not an overnight thing. If you've got burnout, it takes proper recovery time. I would suggest that you certainly look at it. It really very much depends on which of those answers are the killer answer. Is the killer answer, because you're not aligned with your work? Is it because you're not paid enough? Each one of those can have related sort of recovery steps. But I would say if you're burnout, if you're burnt out, the chances are all of them are present in one way or another. And that's when you have to ask the bigger questions. What am I doing in this organization? Is this what I want to do with my life? Because if you kind of just say, well, I'm just going to go and sort out my pay, and I'll get paid a hell of a lot more, but none of those other things are going to shift, then it's only a matter of time before something else bites you on the backside. So we would recommend that if you do get to that point where you have what is clinically diagnosable as burnout, then time out. And during that time out, it's not about just resting, although some of that absolutely is key. But some of it is about asking yourself the bigger question, about the choices that you are continuing to make around your professional life. What sacrifice, what matters to you, and how can you make sure that this is no longer a factor in your professional sort of productiveness for what remains of your career. And I think quite a few people through COVID did exactly that. They may not have gone through this, formal sort of 6-step process, but was the opportunity to stop a little bit in the early days of COVID and to reflect on, wow, I now realize this was missing, and how work made me feel. And I've decided to quit and go into teaching or whatever. So stopping to not only physically recover, but also to take stock of what's going on with you is probably the first step towards recovery. And of course, being in the field that I am in, I would encourage that you have somebody to ask those questions with you. Quite difficult to stay on track and to have that sort of two-way conversation with yourself in a productive way that doesn't sort of just make you go around in circles. So talking through it with a coach or a psychotherapist or a counselor, whatever works for you, is something that we would definitely recommend, because sometimes you need to say things out loud to really hear what you're saying. So the answer is often, within you, without sounding spiritual about it. But you do need somebody to kind of just get it out of you to make you realize what really matters.
So I would suggest then that the first point is it's just a little bit of that kind of personal reflection.
Definitely.
And taking that time just to kind of on your own, just reflect and say, right, what is happening here? Where is this coming from? What are the triggers? What is looking through that checklist that you talked earlier on? I'm a big fan of that checklist idea in a number of different facets, and whether it become to my day job from a recruitment perspective. Are we on board with what we're trying to do for our clients? Do we have that checklist? But also from a personal aspect, from what you're saying here just now, I think that's a really, really valuable lesson. But I'm also in full agreement with you that talking about it with somebody, and certainly this subject title, talking about somebody who's a little bit more experienced, and who can really help you effectively become better, is key. And that obviously, just to kind of wrap our time up, is where the Soke can come in. So just to kind of, we've talked a little bit burnout there just now, and I hope that's been helpful for people. Let's talk for a couple of minutes about the Soke. What drove you or inspired you or pushed you to start the Soke, Maryam? Give us a bit of background to that.
My sort of personal background included the suicide of my father and my brother, not together, but within a short time frame, 3 or 4 years. And I worked in communication and branding. And I became very curious, and to some extent, I suppose, a little bit worried that there might be this thing in my family that I might also have or catch. So I decided to go and speak to a psychotherapist, and then from speaking to a psychotherapist, I became curious about learning about psychotherapy. You know, what's actually, because there is, you know, you sit there and you think, I wonder what they're thinking. Or certainly I did in those days. So I then trained as a psychotherapist. And in that process, I'd experienced it both as a receiver of therapy and a provider of therapy. And it became so clear to me that there were massive voids between the conversation that is taking place in the big wide world around, you know, destigmatization and accessibility and all of those things around mental health, and actually what people were experiencing, which was still very clinical. It was the relationship traditionally in a mental health setup is between the patient and the practitioner, whether it's a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. What I wanted to do was to recognize that for somebody to think about therapy and to then go ahead and sort of book time, choose the place they wanted to go, make the arrangements to go, and then have somebody to talk about it and say, this is what I thought of my practitioner. I didn't like them. I did like them. You know, whatever the feedback is. That's lots of touch points. And right now that doesn't exist. You go to see your therapist. If you don't like them, the only person you can tell is your therapist, which can have its benefits, but people don't do that, especially if they're in the early days of therapy. They're not at that stage where they can be ready to confront it. So the idea for the Soke was to create a centre, first of all, where lots of people with different specialities work under the same roof. So we have psychiatrists who deal with everything from addiction to autism to you name it, basically, depression and anxiety, to somebody who is, for example, a grief therapist or a and we bring all of these people together under one roof and we pay them to collaborate. So again, an area that we differentiate ourselves from other providers is that most private mental health organizations, it's sort of the rent-a-room model. So the practitioner, you know, gets their own clients, pays for the room and so on and so forth. We pay our practitioners for the full day, whether they see one client or 5, we pay them for the full day. And that means that the client can rest assured that whatever the advice they're getting or direction sort of they may be navigating with their practitioner, the practitioner has zero financial gain or interest. And every single day we tools down at 11 o'clock and all the practitioners get together and they discuss cases and they get advice from each other. And somebody might be seeing somebody for depression, also want to know about addiction issues. So that's what we've done in under one roof, and we've tried to also make the environment feel very unclinical. I mean, I'm in one of the practice rooms now, which does not look like a...
No, it doesn't. It's lovely. Yeah.
So the idea is that not only will people feel comfortable to seek it out, but we do a lot of preventative work, which, you know, you and I have touched on in this conversation about trying to spot the signs before it gets to crisis point. So if somebody comes to us, they don't necessarily have to feel as if they're at breaking point. They come to see us and say, you know, I'm doing brilliantly in my career. I want to know how I can unlock elements that will make me be able to sort of continue on this trajectory for however long. So we do a lot of work around that as well. And that's, and we've got our centre in South Kensington. We're about to open a second centre in Wimbledon next week, in fact. And we hope that it's sort of engaging with mental health be common enough to justify our sort of spreading our wares really to lots of different people. You know, my hope is that in the future, people will have a therapist in the way that they have a coach.
Coach.
So,
no, listen, I didn't understand that. I didn't appreciate that. It's a very personal story there. Thank you for, you know, just kind of giving us that background, but that does help. And it's clear that you personally have come through a lot, and I'm absolutely convinced that anybody watching this just now perhaps haven't gone through the same experience as yourself, Maryam, but are going through or have gone through challenges and struggles, whether it be to do with burnout or whether to do with wider mental health challenges, that they can take some action and hopefully take some action on that today from listening, and obviously they can reach out to you guys at the Soke, and maybe kick that off. And we would encourage people to do that. That's certainly, that would be the message from today, that you've learned something about burnout, and if there's something there that can be helpful to you, then reach out to the guys at the Soke.
Yeah.
Maryam, it's been great. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. And the Soke are partnering with us in the next few episodes that we're going to be showing over the next while. So all contact details, if anyone wants to reach out to them confidentially, will be available in the future. So Maryam, thank you. It's been good to talk to you, and well, I'm sure you and I will talk again very soon.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Very much.